Hey, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the open mic. I, of course, am Rich Ehisen, and this is where you come every week to hear me talk to really great writers about what they do. And I am thrilled with the own words today to welcome one of my favorites, a great guy, great writer. Many of you have, if you haven't read his books, you've certainly probably seen the TV series. Craig Johnson, the man behind the great Walt Longmire mystery series. How are you doing this morning, Craig?
I'm doing great. It's not snowing here in Wyoming, so life is good.
That is good. You know, we here on the West Coast, we forget sometimes how the weather can be other places. You know, we get spoiled. So
Well, it was pretty funny because I did an interview last night, or a little bit of a show last night, like with Lori King and Lee Child, like that. And Lee's got a little place down, in the southern portion of Wyoming now, like that. And I happened to ask him, I was like, well, how much time do you actually spend in Wyoming, Lee? And he's like, oh my God, Craig, it's too cold. The winters are horrible. I was like, didn't you know about that before you bought the place, or was that a surprise? Like that. So yeah,
yeah.
our winters tend to, kind of go in all the way through April, like, and then kind of leak into May a little bit too. And I always laugh about it because people will ask me that question. They say that there's an awful lot of snow in your books, and I'm always like, well, it's not the sheriff of Key West, I mean, in Wyoming, we
Right.
have winter and then, the 4th of July, those are our two seasons, like it. And so, you just have to make up and do the best you can with what you get.
There you go. Well, let's talk a little bit, of course, about your books. The current Longmire book, and I know you've got another one that's going to come out later in the year. But let's talk about the one that's the most current, that's out right now, which really touches on one of the most iconic events in American history, which of course was the Battle at Little Bighorn, uh, and more specifically, some artwork that claims to depict that battle. Tell folks about that storyline.
There are certain, mountains that you're going to have to climb, according to, what particular portion of the genre you happen to be writing in, like that. And when you're a Western mystery writer, there are certain points of history, that kind of loom large in the writing distance there, like that. And of course, where I live, my ranch is right here on the Montana-Wyoming border, and so the Little Bighorn is only, like about a mile, about an hour and 15 minutes, rather, up the road. And so, I've been there, I've explored, the battle scene. I've talked, with an awful lot of Crow and Northern Cheyenne, elders like who actually, had great grandfathers, who fought in the battles. And it's very close, that particular portion of American history, to where it is that I live. And so I knew eventually I was gonna, probably, deal with, Custer and Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. But the question always is, well, how? How do you, have the sheriff, Walt Longmire, the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state in America, get involved with that situation? You can't just kind of glom it in there and, and see what happens. I mean, you really need an access point, to make it work. And generally that access point needs to be a crime, because generally you're having law enforcement involved like that. So they have to have an access point. So I don't know. I just, for me, it was relatively easy because the painting in question, that we're discussing at this point in time, is called Custer's Last Fight. And it was painted by an author, an artist by the name of Cassily Adams out of St. Louis, Missouri. And it was one of these huge, big, huge, paintings, that they used to do, these historical paintings that were, like the size of like the side of an 18-wheel truck. They were like, 16 feet by, by 10 feet. They were huge. And I guess at that point in time, what they used to do was they would tour these paintings in a wagon and charge people a quarter to come in and see the painting. And the idea being that, of course, this was a period in time before, there was 24-hour news cycles and television and radio and all of these different things. People would go in and they would feel as if they had experienced, this historic moment. And so, they toured this painting and then they brought it back to St. Louis, and they didn't really know what to do with it, And so what they did instead, they actually had an offer from the guy who owned the saloon next to the train station there in St. Louis. And he said, well, I'll buy the painting. And he bought it at a bargain basement price because they really didn't know what to do with it. It was so large, and not very much in demand. Um, so the saloon owner took it and he put it, up on the wall, there in the saloon like that. And what it was basically a conversation piece. Travelers would come in and have a whiskey, have a beer, and look up, between trains like that, and start discussing, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, which at that point in time was still, very current history. You got to keep in mind, that it was only like, this is only like maybe about 20 years after the fact. So it was still, very much on people's minds. Like, and it was also a major turning point, in American history, in a sense that, the Northern Cheyenne and the Lakota and a few Arapaho actually, like, fought the American military to a standstill. And so, major point in American history like that. Well, anyway, people, it was up there for a number of years, I think all the way up through until like, I think the 1930s. And, then of course what happens in these kind of situations is the saloon went bankrupt, which is why it is that I have never put money into a restaurant or into a saloon, because it's a great way to lose your money, it seems like to me, and also an awfully difficult way to make a living. I have all the respect in the world for bar and saloon and restaurant owners. That's a rough road to hoe. But anyway, this one went out of business like that, and one of their largest creditors was a small local brewery, local brewer by the name of Anheuser-Busch. And Augie Busch there in St. Louis, comes down and says, hey, you owe me $30,000, for all the beer. What are we going to do here? Like, and they said, well, we're bankrupt. We don't have any money. We don't have anything. And he looks up on the wall, always, seeing an opportunity when he saw one. He looked up on the wall, saw the big painting, Cassili Adams's painting, and said, I'll take the painting. And so they peeled it off the wall. He rolled it up under his arms like it, and he took it, back up to the brewery, rolled it out on a big table in front of his marketing and publicity guys, and said, "We're going to make posters of this painting, and we're going to ship them out to every restaurant, every saloon, every bar in the country. And we're going to put Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company on the bottom. And by the time we're through with promoting this, we're going to be a much bigger brewer than we are right now." Well, it worked. Anheuser-Busch is now, I guess, one of the largest brewers in the world. And at one point in time, they were sending out almost 1 million of these posters every year. Wow. And so everybody, if you travel anywhere in the American West, and it doesn't even have to be in the American West, I've seen this poster hanging, in New York, in a bars. I've seen it hanging, in Los Angeles, like at overseas in France, in Paris. I've seen it hanging in walls, like there's so many of them like that. And it's just a constant. You see this painting everywhere, and the artistic credit, the merit of the merits, of the painting, are somewhat questionable. There are a lot of inaccuracies as far as certainly the way that the Indians are dressed. In many ways, they look more like Zulu warriors than they do, Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Like, and then there's a lot of geographic problems, with it, and everything like that. And so it's kind of interesting, like, to kind of point out some of those things that are wrong. But that kind of became, to make a long story short, my access point for Walt Longmire, because what happened is that after this painting had served its purpose with Anheuser-Busch, Augie Busch decided in a fit of philanthropic zeal that he would give the painting to the headquarters of the 7th Cavalry, which at that point in time happened to be located down just outside of El Paso in Texas, at Fort Bliss. And one horribly velvety night, the building, the officers' club and commissary where they had the big painting up on the wall, caught on fire and burned to the ground, and the painting was destroyed. Uh-huh. Or was it? That's the whole key element, to this particular book. Maybe what if that painting survived? What if it were to survive? And I was talking to my good friends over at the Buffalo Bill Museum over in Cody and brought the subject up and said, well, if this thing, were to pop back up, how much would it be worth? And I remember Mary, the McCracken Library, she looks at me and she goes, oh, 25, 26. And I was like, $26,000. She goes, $26 million, Craig. She said that painting is an incredible point in social American history, right, and it would be worth a fortune. And I was like, well, I think I've got my MacGuffin here. I think I've got the element that I need to start Walt off on his first art heist. And and that became the next to last stand.
Wow. Well, and you touched on the what if. I mean, that is such the critical two words, I think, in all of mystery writing. What if? What if? What if? I love that as a starting point for anything in a story. Well, what if this happened? Um, Tell me a little bit about the new book. What's the what if in the new book?
The new book, like, I mean, whenever you're composing books, there are a lot of, people will ask the question, how did you come to this, idea like that? And, and how do you decide, which books it is, that you're gonna write? And for me, it's a little bit of a unique problem, like that, in the sense that, I don't know, a lot of readers have picked up on the fact that it takes me about, 4 books to get through 1 year of Walt's life. I tend to refer to it as the Vivaldi school of writing. It's the 4 seasons, like it. And the reason I came to that was actually, when I was discussing it with my good buddy Tony Hillerman, a long time ago, like down there in Albuquerque, we were talking, and he was like on his, I don't know, 15th book, and I was like struggling with my second book, and of course, any author who will be honest with you will tell you that the second book is always the most difficult book to do, because generally what happens is you work 15, 17 years, to write a book, and you polish it and hone it down to where it needs to be. And then, if you're lucky, an agent picks it up, a publisher picks it up, and they publish it. And then the next thing out of their mouth is we need another book in 6 months. Do you think you can knock that out? Well, suddenly, it's a whole different ball game, and so it makes it a little more difficult like that. But one of the things I decided is that, after talking with Tony, was that, you need to have different environs, for each book, and especially in the situation that I'm in, with Walt, working out of a small town in, a very rural county, in northern Wyoming. He has to, it would be very easy to fall into what I refer to the Mayberry syndrome,
Right.
where, there would be a kind of a repetitious kind of quality, to the formula of the books. And I really fought against that. And so one of the things, Tony said was, you got to find, a little bit of a way of changing things up and making things different with each book. And so I thought to myself, well, what's the thing that has the largest scale effect, on us, here in Wyoming? And I thought, it's got to be the weather, as we were discussing right there at the very beginning of the interview. And Wyoming in January is nothing at all like Wyoming in July. And so I knew that would give me, a very different kind of environment, for this book. And so I kind of have to pick and choose, because like I can't write a rodeo book that takes place, in January, like it. And so I kind of have to be careful about that. So that will predicate, what exactly the next story will be. The next one will be a social issue. Most generally, I found that if a book is going to hold my attention, for the 9 months that it's going to take me, to write it, to gestate, that book, it needs to have, some kind of commentary on some kind of a social issue or something that's going on
Mhm.
these days. And then the other one that takes, a large part is what kind of an effect is it going to have on the characters? Where are they at this particular time in their lives, and what is this case and this particular, issue going to take, with them? And for me, this one was kind of easy. It kind of fell into place, pretty easily. Like that, this was a kind of a late fall book. The issue itself, was missing and murdered Indigenous women, which has been a major issue here in Indian country. It's a horrifying situation, where there's so many Native women like that who have been murdered or turn up missing. I mean, up in Montana, they make up about, I think it's a full quarter.
Sorry about
See, the
that.
dog agrees. See,
Yes. Sorry. My
they
faithful
make up.
companion here.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got mine sitting on the sofa right over here, like that. But and they make up like 25% of the missing people in Montana. And the number of of Native women who are killed every year is horrifying in comparison with the regular populace. Like, and then to discover that the majority of these cases of murders are done by non-native people on native lands. And so it was kind of an issue that I thought, okay, I kind of need to take a crack at this. But then you have to find a vehicle, something to work with as far as that was concerned. And I had been up on the reservation with a good friend of mine, Marcus Red Thunder, who's kind of the model for Henry in the books, and he introduced me to a fellow by the name of Tiger Scalp Cane. And Tiger Scalp Cane was the athletic director for the high school there in Lame Deer. And we went up like that, and there was a girls basketball game. And, boy, girls basketball, on the res is kind of like the Battle of the Little Bighorn. If you really want to see elbows and, full contact basketball, like that res basketball is, the place to go. And it's also, such I think a solace, for a lot of the difficulties that you find on the reservation, that it provides, such a wonderful outlet, for a lot of the younger set. And so I started thinking about it, and I thought, maybe that, would be a situation. And so what I developed was a storyline where there's a young phenom basketball player, Jaya Long, who was actually introduced, in the previous book in Next to Last Stand. There's a 3-on-3 basketball tournament up in Billings, and we actually get introduced to her and her aunt, Lolo Long, who is the tribal police chief on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. She starts getting these death threats. Somebody's, threatening her. And so, Lolo Long contacts Walt and says, I think I need some help, with this situation. And so, Walt Longmire has found himself in some very difficult situations before, but being on a bus, with an entire bus load of teenage girl basketball players may be the roughest group he's ever had to go up against in his entire life, like that. So, and that'll be Daughter of the Morning Star, which will be coming out on September 21st.
I love the theme. I have some relatives who grew up in South Dakota and some in Montana, and as I've noted to you before, my mom was born and raised in Banner, which is right by Sheridan, which is only about 20 minutes from, maybe 30 minutes from where you're at. And I think that's one of those things a lot of people don't know, is that how popular basketball is in Native culture. I don't know why it would seem so counterintuitive, but it is. You don't think of this indoor sport being so popular, but it really is, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, I think there are a number of things I think that work, its benefit. Like that, first of all, I mean, with baseball and football and things like that, the amount of equipment that you need a lot of money, to support that type of, of athletic activity. Like, and on the res, sometimes, that's a difficulty like that, because their budgets are strained like that. And so, I mean, with basketball, you need a good pair of shoes, like getting a ball, basically what you need. Like it, and everywhere you go, there's going to be a hoop, up on the side of like a, a little 2-bedroom house, and a dirt, court like that, where, there you'll see those kids out there playing. And then there's a fluidity, I think, to the game that really appeals, I think, to the native sensibility, that there's just a constant movement to it like that. And in many ways, it's almost a dance, which is such a large aspect of, their society. And, in many ways, like that comes to the fore in this particular book. Like there's a lot of dance, like and a lot of that movement that goes on, and then just about the entire book takes place, up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, which was great for me because it gave me an excuse to go up and spend time with all my friends and neighbors and practically family, up there, like
Right.
in a kind of a difficult period in time. I mean, with COVID going on and all of that, I think everybody feels a little isolated, and I think that the way that COVID has really hit hard in a lot of the reservations, it's made it even more difficult for them. So to just, be able to go up and check on them and make sure that they were okay, and just spend time, with my friends, and it's another world. I never have to worry about going, to some far flung, part of the world. It's a whole nother world just right across the border up there in Montana, which is just spectacular.
Well, you mentioned Tony Hillerman, who's also one of my very favorite authors, and one of the things that I loved about his Navajo Tribal Police series so much was it was so clear that he invested so much time and energy into getting the mythologies right, not just the mythologies, the daily life, what it's like in the modern day res. And I read that he spent a lot of time, years, learning all that and just becoming part of that community in New Mexico before he ever even started writing those books. It's one of the things I really like about your books too. It's so clear that you also have a deep respect for Native culture and for making sure that these characters are very three-dimensional. And that shouldn't be odd, but let's face it, in the history of writing the Western stories, that a lot of times Native Americans are not portrayed so three-dimensionally. Please expound on that a little bit about how you approach writing these characters, and your thought process, and how, and of course not just the native characters, but how you have them intermingle with your non-native characters.
Well, it's a passion, I think, first off. Like, I think you have to have a passion and an appreciation. And I think that those are the two powerful tools that will lead you, pretty unerringly, down that road. I mean, that's the thing is that, I mean, in times and periods, where sometimes, authors can get, criticized for, social appropriation and that type of thing. You have to make sure you get it right. You really, really do. I mean, these are a people, like, these are a culture, a society, like at a nation, unto themselves. And if you're going to include them in the books, you really have to make sure that you treat them with the respect, that they deserve. They're just such spectacular people like that, and there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to try. I mean, it's a lifetime achievement, to try, and try and get them right. And one of the things I love, and one of the things I'm very, very proud of, is the fact that the books and the television show are extraordinarily popular, up on the res, up on what I consider to be my res, the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow reservations. And to the point where, whenever I first started out and I was doing all that research and spending all that time with everyone up there, I finally got to the point where, one of my favorite quotes about writing is the one from Wallace Stegner, where he says, "The greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says nobody in this book is based off anybody alive or dead." And what a crock that is. I mean, that's what you do. You go out and find interesting people and populate your novels with them. And, I'm no different, than any other. Like that. Well, the problem with that, of course, is that I write in Wyoming. And so there's only 500,000 people in Wyoming. So whenever I stick somebody in my books, everybody knows who I'm talking about. And it's even worse up on the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow reservation, because they're about like 5,000 enrolled members up there, and so everybody knows who I'm talking about when I put Lonnie Littlebird in the books, or I talk about Henry or Dina Minicamps or Lolo Long or all of the other characters. They all know who I'm talking about. And 9 times out of 10, I don't even bother changing the names anymore. I just go ahead, I'll ask, I'll say, "Hey, you're in this book, you didn't kill anybody or anything like that. Do you mind if I go ahead and use your name?" And their immediate response is, "Absolutely. Are you kidding me? I want to buy copies and give them to all my friends and show them what a celebrity I am, for goodness sake." And so that's kind of reassuring like that, whenever
Yeah.
you're, writing outside your realm like that. But then again, I've got a little bit of an advantage in the sense that, the protagonist in my books, the character that I write, he's a white guy, he's a white sheriff like that. And that gives me an opportunity an awful lot of the time, even as knowledgeable as Walt is, in that world. He's not completely infallible and totally knowledgeable, which gives Henry the opportunity to kind of like teach Walt as we go along. And then in the long run, it also is an opportunity to teach the readers who are, I mean, the books are translated in about 20 different languages all over the world, and reach all points, the globe and all over the country here, to teach them about these incredible people, that live just a little bit north of me. And it's just, it would be, I hate using the term because it's a terrible pun, but it would be criminal for me to not include them in my books. Whenever I'm reading, books that take place in my part of the world, and there aren't any natives in there, I'm like, well, what did you do with them? Where, what part of my world are you in? Because they become such a large part, of who I am and where I am, and the place that I live. I don't think I could tolerate, dropping them out. That's important to me. I mean, as few enough ethnicities as there are, on the high plains, I try and utilize as many of them as I possibly can. I mean, the natives are, omnipresent, in the books. But then there are also others. I mean, whenever I put the Basque culture, in my books, I had to laugh because the books got translated, into French and into Spanish, and we were actually in that Pyrenees region of the Basque portion, the frontier there, and doing a book event in Bayonne. And the first question, that they all had for me was, "There are Basques in Wyoming?" And I was like, "Did you guys lose them or what?" "Yeah, there are a lot of Basques in Wyoming." So,
Well, Craig, let me follow up on that, because I was going to ask you. So I read, when A&E dropped the show before it went to Netflix, one of their main thing was they felt the demographic for the show was too old, essentially. And I found that so surprising because stories of the West are so enduring. And well, maybe not in the way they were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they're still incredibly popular across a huge swath of the culture. And I wonder if, first of all, I wonder, what your thought is on this, but I wonder if some of it is because modern day Western writers like yourself do include so well and so thoroughly the fact that there were many cultures that were part of the Western environment, not just white Europeans and Native Americans. That there were Mexicans and Spaniards and Basque and on and on and on. Do you think that's part of it, or what do you think is the thing that makes this such an enduringly popular theme?
Well, I think that the readers are a lot shrewder, than they used to be. Like there were a lot of readers that just, and there are still a lot of readers that just read for the entertainment value. But the BS meter, on an awful lot of readers nowadays is they can tell pretty quick if you're kind of making things up, and it's kind of disingenuous, for you to do that to them like that. You really have to try and search for a truth. And that's the truth, is that there were, multifaceted, cultures and societies that made up the American West. And that's kind of, important to make sure that you get that across. And also makes for much more interesting books, makes for much more interesting characters, a much more varied experience, not only in the writing like that, but also in the reading. Now to go back, I have to jump back real quick here. Talking about the BS meter, that was A&E's excuse, whenever it is that they decided to drop Longmire. What actually had happened is it was the highest rated scripted drama that they had ever had in their history as a network. And so they went to Netflix, not to Netflix, but they went to Warner Brothers and said, we want to buy Longmire. Because, a network can make a lot more money off of a show if they own it, rather than just licensing it from a studio. Well, Warner Brothers looked at them and said, we're the highest rated scripted drama you've ever had. Why would we sell ourselves to you? And A&E, in their infinite knowledge at that point in time and intelligence, said, well, if you don't sell it to us, we're going to cancel it. And Warner said, well, you're going to look kind of funny canceling the highest rated scripted drama you ever had. And what I learned in my experiences with Hollywood is never try and underestimate the intelligence of television executives. You can't dig that low. So they did. So to cut off their nose to spite their face, they canceled Longmire. Well, there was this major uproar, write-in campaigns, and they lost like 30% of their network audience. And so they had to come up with a spin really quick, to try and save face. And so they said, oh, well, it's because the demographic was too old. That's what it was. And well, we were fortunate, in that that was the point in time when there was this little streaming company that was coming up. And I remember talking to Peter Roth, at Warner Brothers. And I said, well, Peter, are we going to get picked up again? We were a successful TV show. And he goes, oh, yeah, we're going to get picked up again. And I said, well, where do you think we're going to end up? And he goes, well, I think we're going to end up with this streaming service. You have to remember, this is back at the very beginning when streaming services were just starting. And I said, well, what's that mean? And he goes, oh, it's where you can watch, a TV show on your phone and on your computer. And I was like, oh, that's it. We're dead. We're dead. We're never going to be heard from again. Well, that was Netflix, so who's become like the biggest producer, towering over top of all of the studios there in Hollywood. And we're actually still one of the top 10 original programming, shows on Netflix 3 years after they went to Warner Brothers. After 3 years of production, went to Warner Brothers and said, we want to buy Longmire. And once again, Warner said, no, we're not going to sell it to you. And they were a little bit better than A&E. They said, well, we're going to finish up after 3 years and stop production. Well, that was 3 years ago, and we're still one of the top 10, original content shows on Netflix. And so I don't know when we're going to be off of Netflix anytime soon, but yeah, we seem to be, chugging right along.
Well, I'm grateful for it because I enjoy the show, and I can absolutely assure you I have relatives in Casper who tell me they did not miss a single episode. So and they forgive you for it being actually shot in New Mexico instead of Wyoming.
I can usually shut that down. Generally, when everybody in Wyoming says, why didn't they film it in Wyoming? And I'm always like, they start filming in February.
Yeah, there you go.
So unless you wanted it to look like Nome, Alaska, which just wasn't going to work.
Yeah, there you go. I only have two other questions for you, but the first one is the Walt Longmire of the TV show and the Walt Longmire of the books is pretty much the same, with what I would think is one notable difference, and that the Walt Longmire that you write has much more of a sense of humor, a visible sense of humor. The Robert Taylor's Walt Longmire is a little more laconic, a little more reserved, a little more stoic. Maybe was that something that the TV guys said, we need this because it's more the classic thing, or what's your thought? And do readers go, hey, if they come to the books after they've seen the TV series, do they go, well, that's weird, well, it's different or something? What do you ever run into that?
Oh yeah. And that's generally, there are a couple of major differences like that. Where Walt, the two Walts kind of
Mm-hmm.
part company like that. The one being that the Walt in the books is obviously a little bit older, than Robert Taylor. That was one of the first things that the producers said to me. They said, well, we think we're going to make Walt and Henry a little bit younger than they are in the books, and I had the redneck cowboy, author response where I was like, well, now why are we doing that? And they said, well, because we'd like the show to run for about 10 years. And at the end of the run, we'd rather not have them on walkers by the time we're done. So I had a hard time arguing that point with them. Another one is that, Walt is actually, believe it or not, bigger in the books. Robert Taylor's about 6'3", and he's a pretty good sized guy. By Hollywood standards, he's a giant. And so I was tickled to death, to get him. But in the books, Walt is like 6'5" and weighs something like 255 pounds. He was an offensive lineman for USC. He was a Marine investigator. I think I've referred to him before as a refrigerator with a head, is the way I've described him. And then the last one, of course, is the one that you just mentioned, the sense of humor. For me, humor is it's just lock, stock, and trade. It's part of the deal. Every time I try and write a serious scene, there are going to be 4 or 5, comic remarks that are going to come up. I just don't have any control over that. I can usually weed out about a third of them but there's 2/3 of them that are going to make it back in there. And also, the thing that I've noticed, I just got finished doing the Sheriff and Chiefs of Police Association meeting down in Casper for the state of Wyoming, and consistently, what law enforcement tells me when they read the books is that they really love the books, for the procedural aspects, and there's an honesty to them. But one of the things they really love is the humor. They really, really love the humor.
Yeah.
Whenever you're in that kind of a job, whenever you're in that kind of a situation, and that can be anything, anybody. You can be a teacher, you can be in medicine, you can be in law enforcement, whatever like that. If you're facing a difficult situation, one of the ways you get through that to get to the end of the day is by having a sense of humor. It'll protect you better than a bulletproof vest will on a daily basis, And so for me, the humor kind of became an essential part of it like that. And as far as the departure with the television show, when we were on A&E, it was basic cable. It was a basic cable television show with, commercials, 15-minute increments, and the entire show itself was 45 minutes long. And so anything that didn't have to do absolutely with the plot of that particular episode got chucked out. It was interesting for me because I would read the scripts, that they were doing. They would have a room full of writers, along with the producers, and they would write a script and then they would send it to me so that I could go through and say, yeah, no, you can't drive down to Denver in 2 hours. No, no, Walt has no jurisdiction on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. No, if a body were to flow along in the Powder River, it can't go south. It would have to swim against the current. It would have to go north. Little things like that, but there was also a ton of humor. There was a lot more humor in the scripts than actually made it into the show, which was, for me, a little bit heartbreaking like that. But, that was one of the problems that you face, as far as basic cable television was concerned, that you had to get the story in, you had to tell the plot. And I think what happened is that it was such a success those first 3 years. The producers really didn't want to reinvent the wheel whenever we made the jump, over to Netflix. There were some changes that they made, but the general tone and everything, they wanted to keep it, the way it was because it had been such a success.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's understandable. Well, I only have one other question for you. It's my standard closing question. I like to end on what I hope is a fun note. I mean for it to be a fun note, and also maybe a little challenging for you.
Uh-oh.
Let us say that I had the magical power to put you together for a drink and a conversation with any one of the following three people. Who would you choose and why? And the options I'm going to give you are Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, the great Lakota warrior Crazy Horse, or Martha Jane Canary, who most of us know better as Calamity Jane. I've gone all Western for you. Of those three, I could put you together with one of them. Who would you choose and why?
Gotta be Crazy Horse. Gotta be Crazy Horse. For so many reasons. Like, I mean, talk about a Renaissance man. I mean, he was, a philosopher, a shaman, a warrior, a storyteller, all of these things like that. And, there isn't even a photograph of him. There's so little, that we know. But just so many facets to the man, that I would, like to, to hear about, like that, and just see, what he was like as a human being. Because, as far as being an incredible and multifaceted individual, he'd have to be right there at the top of the list. Just for so many different reasons, like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he'd have to be the one.
Well, I'm not surprised. Thank you, and I'm thrilled at that. That makes me happy. Craig, thank you again. If anyone out there is watching this, if you haven't seen either the TV series or read the books, what are you waiting for? We're burning daylight here. Get to it. I highly recommend them. Craig, the only thing that you are better at as a writer is being a gracious person and a fabulous interview. And I really appreciate your time today. I think I'm going to speak for everybody in saying thank you for sharing all this with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Rich. Anytime.
Great. Well, hey, I may hold you to that.
No problem. Happy to do it.
And for those of you out there, if this was enjoyable, hit the subscribe button. And because I got folks coming all the time who are more than happy to share their insights and stories about their work. So for myself, Rich Ehisen, for Craig Johnson today, for my dog Stella, who was over here and made an appearance earlier, unwarranted. See you on the next go around. Take care.